On Saturday, the 15th of April 2023, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces started a war that now, 3 years later, has killed hundreds of thousands of Sudanese civilians, left 25 million people at risk of famine, and displaced an entire nation. Today, the 15th of April 2026, marks 3 years since what has been dubbed as the Forgotten War first broke out. But the trouble didn't start in 2023. In late 2018, the December Revolution saw millions of Sudanese civilians protest initially against the cost of living crisis, but soon it grew into a call to overthrow then 30-year military dictator Omar al-Bashir.
I will take you a little bit back. I think we always talk about the revolution in 2018, 2019, but it started way before that. In 2013, people started going to the streets and so on. Most of the people who started to go out were young people, like myself. I was young at that time. So yes, I've been regularly going out during demonstrations, any political civilian kind of response to the oppression in Sudan. So since 2013, it's a regular thing to be there during protests and so on. But of course, 2018, it started to become massive, even though it was still very dangerous, very complicated. I would say that it's a part of my life that I will never forget, how the masses started to build up in 2019, in April at this time, until Bashir was removed from the government.
Al-Bashir will be remembered for being a violent ruler who abused the Islamic faith to validate his atrocities against millions. His role in the Sudanese conflict in 2003 stole nearly 2 decades from the people of Sudan. It led to over 300,000 deaths and the displacement of over 2.5 million citizens. Al-Bashir's targeted violence against dark-skinned populations like the Darfuris also largely led to the creation of South Sudan. In February 2020, Sudan's Sovereign Council gave newly ousted al-Bashir to the International Court of Justice, where he was then charged with 3 counts of genocide and 5 counts of crimes against humanity. It was a triumphant moment that saw Sudanese women step to the forefront and outnumber their male counterparts out on the streets, demanding to be included in the foundational moments of making Sudan work for everyone.
In Sudan, documentary photography and photojournalism became an important tool. And to me, it was, especially when it comes to the demonstrations, it was a very strong tool to tell and encourage other Sudanese people to come and join us, because many people did not believe that, people are out there despite the oppression, despite the media trying to suppress or to downsize how huge these protests were. What I witnessed in 2019 especially was a time that where I could finally, have that sense of feeling of a united Sudan. People are coming together from all over the country. People are uniting towards a common goal, and it was just a beautiful feeling.
The people of Sudan were fighting for a civilian-led government, but in all of the chaos and commotion, the National Army, the Sudanese Armed Forces, quickly positioned themselves as the nation's new head, including a few civilians in an attempt to tame the crowd.
These groups of people specifically had vested interests in what Sudan would look like. These aren't people that are just political figures. A separate discussion can be had about how you separate the army from politics. But these are people that also have strong economic interests in the country, who hold a vast amount of the country's wealth. So whatever the democratic transition had to look like, there was a reason why they wanted to have a political stake in it, because they have vested interests within the country and a very high status that they didn't want to lose.
In September 2020, a transitional government was created, and the newly formed governing body signed a peace deal with the Sudan Revolution Front, a coalition of 9 paramilitary groups that had formed over the nation's 17-year civil war. A lot of the civil war boiled down to a long-standing feud between 2 army generals vying for power and control over Sudan. A year into the coalition government, and the people were back out on the streets as they claimed life in Sudan was actually getting worse. In October 2021, the military coalition staged what they have referred to as everything but a coup. They shut down the internet, they shut down airports, and detained the civilian members of the coalition government. At that point, the leader of the Sudanese Armed Forces, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, agreed to continue working towards civilian rule and even scheduled elections for 2023. But those on the ground and watching the situation unfold were not convinced. Pro-democracy civilians continued to protest and were violently suppressed by the state. At least 120 protesters were killed during the years of the transitional government. Fast forward 8 months to July 2022, and al-Burhan is again announcing that the military would be withdrawing completely and that civilians would be given the opportunity to form a government. In December of that year, a provisional agreement ratifying this promise was signed by Sudan's military, paramilitary, and several civilian leaders. But negotiations continued to fail as it became painfully clear that those who supported al-Burhan's military and those who favored the paramilitaries of the Rapid Support Forces were not interested in having Sudan led by its people. And on the 15th of April 2023, shots were heard across Khartoum, and to this day, neither side will own up to starting the fight.
The coup in 2021 and then the war, these have interrupted major natural transition in Sudan, and I think it's like completely destroying the whole momentum in which the country was slowly moving towards democracy and development. Of course, as a Sudanese, it's a killer of hope to witness war erupting from the center of Khartoum, and I'm from Darfur. My family members, my friends, my relatives have went through crazy times in 2003 all the way to 2023, but then witnessing war again. And of course, Darfur suffered even much more than the first war. I think it's huge disturbance in our lives as Sudanese. And for me personally, I think it changed everything. Until this day, it's hard to think about, as a person, as a Sudanese and as a father, it's hard to think about the future, tomorrow, what will happen, what to do as a Sudanese, because everything we do depends on, going home, restoring our lives, and that is completely dependent on peace. Without peace, I don't think, as a Sudanese, it's easy to think about the future.
This anniversary date marks 3 years of a power struggle between two men who value power and money over humanity and nationhood. What started as a victorious fight for democracy has led to the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
It's just very much ongoing violence, right? I think there's also this idea that in the war, because it's been so long, I think people automatically think, surely if something is going on for a long time, it's calmed down a bit. I think emphasizing that it's still very urgent and still very much happening. And if anything, the fact that there is less media coverage on it means that there are probably more heinous crimes being done. Today I read this article of these women in Darfur who were part of this, and it was in a safe area or quote unquote safe area in Darfur, and they were part of this local NGO workshop. They attended a local NGO workshop which was about women's rights and protecting women in times of war, and they were meant to give them survival skills and stuff. And they were arrested and detained, and nobody knows where they are.
We at OkayAfrica have been very intentional about not branding this conflict as a civil war, because that's not what it is. Sudanese civilians are not at war with one another. They are being used as collateral in a proxy war that has seen international actors extort an African country with the help of its military.
Just wanting to unpack the idea that it's a civil war. I think a lot of the times, as you said, when people say civil war, they think it's civilians versus civilians. And that has never been the case. And to this day, that is not the case. Like any other conflict in a country, people obviously have opposing views. People obviously have, different opinions about what they view, they want the final result of the conflict to be. And that is a given in any country that has conflict. But what's different about this case in Sudan is that it's a war that the people didn't sign up for, right? It's not a group of people that picked up arms to fight against each other. It's a war that was sprung up upon the people of Sudan by these two figureheads and the forces that back them. And the US, as we know, globally and in the region, specifically in the MENA region and East Africa, has a really strong role. Essentially, what we see today is the fact that a lot of kind of economic hardship has occurred in Sudan, a lot of isolation has occurred in Sudan because of actions that the previous regime did and the US's responses to that. So the US has also played a major role as a negotiator in the country. During the civilian transition between 2019 to 2020, the US was quite a strong actor in advocating for democracy in the country. But of course, that's taken with a grain of salt. There are many people that would argue that the US's interests in Sudan were also very related to kind of the strategic position of Sudan and its location in the Red Sea, its location within North Africa, but also within East Africa, the minerals that Sudan has, and all of those things. So the US today, when we see the war happening, there's a lot of silence and a lot of criticism that people feel towards the US as well. As someone who is interested in the democratic transition, but now when the war has happened, although the US has been part of negotiations, a lot of failed talks have occurred. Though the attacks on Iran have definitely impacted regional instability. And I would say the connection to Sudan is real, but it's also quite indirect. So the broader destabilization of the Middle East and North Africa post the Iran conflict has reshuffled Gulf priorities and consumed also the diplomatic bandwidth that may have otherwise been pushed towards Sudan. And I would say also before the Iran conflict, there was a lot of discussion happening about the conflict in Sudan, the fact that it has lasted this long. So I will say that there has been a reshuffling of priorities. What worries me about the situation, I suppose, is that Sudan risks becoming what many would call like a crisis of crisis fatigue. So the organizations, funding pipelines, and the political will that the situation demands are being absorbed elsewhere in the region. And so Sudan, as we spoke about earlier, renders the risk of still being categorized as this civil war. And what that is, and the reason why that's scary is there's a connotation that when something is a civil war, like when there's no outside aggressor, that it's an African problem, right? Africans dealing with African problems, Africans starting wars against each other. And that's unfortunately what a lot of the media has dumbed it down to be. That's a lot of what like political commentators have dumbed it down to be as well.
The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are alleged to have a long-standing relationship, not just with former autocratic leader al-Bashir, but with the RSF too. On top of that, it's widely known how the UAE acted as a counter-revolutionary force during the 2011 Arab Spring. There is mounting evidence that the UAE has provided financial, political, and military support to the RSF. And in May 2025, Sudan went to the UN's ICJ to sue the UAE for contributing towards a genocide. The ICJ dismissed their case over lack of jurisdiction. In what ways do you think the African Union has helped or failed the people of Sudan?
Yeah, so the African Union has very limited resources, right? And the African Union has not had a say or kind of like an effective solution to the conflict in a very, very long time. At the beginning, we saw them getting involved and periodically trying to enter and leave the discussions. Sudan, when the war began, was expelled from the African Union for the war. So I think the African Union has a lot of internal problems that are preventing it from being an effective leader. Negotiations on Sudan are being funneled into the countries that have sort of like the money and resources, such as the Quad, which is the coalition of the United Kingdom, the US, and a couple of others as well. But again, as I mentioned, there is a lack of attention. Because of the lack of attention on Sudan, nowadays the Quad isn't being as effective as one would hope. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to bring both of the warring parties to the negotiation table to agree on a peace settlement.
Sudan is rich in a number of resources that the UAE needs, the most crucial being Sudan's abundant source of gold. In 2024, the Central Bank of Sudan reported that close to 97% of official gold exports from regions under siege by the military went to the UAE. So it's no surprise they would be deeply invested in who was in charge of the country that they sourced most of their wealth from. Sudan's location on the Red Sea coastline also makes it a coveted location for Arab nations eyeing resources and influence in the region.
Talking to not just people who are political analysts or academics, but talking to those on the ground who have the real life experiences of what this catastrophe is actually doing to them. And I think that helps differentiate the fact that it shakes this idea in the media that this is a civil war and shows that it is a war that has a massive human catastrophic impact and is beyond the idea of like, yeah, civil war. That this is, like you said, a proxy war, a war that is ingrained in for the last few years, a war that is between these two army generals that are selfishly trying to control different parts of the country at whatever cost that may be. So platforming those voices, I think, is the most important, because there is also this narrative, I believe, even before the war, right, that Sudan is this war-torn country. Sudan has been impacted by genocide, and while all of those things are true, that there has been war and there has been genocide, that shouldn't lead to apathy from the international community. In fact, it should lead to action, discussion, and platforming of the most vulnerable voices that are in the country.
Especially too because war is man-made. And so if it's a war-torn country, why not look at why one of many, but this specific country is continuously generations upon generation experiencing war and genocide? You should want to look more into it logically.
I think a lot of the silence has also occurred when it's just not like, it's not interesting to talk about Sudan, right? It's not interesting to talk about it because it has a history of conflict, or because people get put off because they think, oh, it's too complicated to understand, right? Like I said, it's not an easily digestible conflict in the sense that, or people like to think that it's not easily digestible conflict because it's not like country A attacked country B, right?
You spoke of activists on the ground, community organizers in Sudan. What do you believe is the sentiment? I mean, from the December Revolution and people feeling empowered and, knowing that they could do more, to now 3 years of violence, which part of the violence is to kill the human spirit. But what would you say the sentiment is on the ground?
I will say Sudanese people are very strong. They're very adaptable. But I will also say that the international community, neighboring countries also make it quite difficult for them to obtain things that are like citizenship rights, right? So like being able to obtain like refugee status so you can be able to work in a country is something that has been really, really difficult. I personally know people who are trapped in neighboring countries and unable to leave because if they leave, they're not able to re-enter. So like sort of these restrictions of mobility are really difficult. And on the ground in Sudan itself, for many, especially in regions such as Darfur, it is a question of survival, right? As we are speaking, you and I right now, there are genocides being launched in Darfur. There are people being killed and hunted in the Nuba Mountains, all for the sake of this senseless war.
My parents are still in Sudan, in Omdurman. My elder brother had to leave the country, and so I left as well. And that's the case of most Sudanese families. We are torn in between different countries around the world. Some families went to Egypt. Parents, generation of my father, many have decided to just stick and stay at home because leaving home was something that they could not even think about or negotiate. So they stayed during a very difficult time. They are in a safer space right now, but Sudan still remains an active war zone, and life is very difficult in Sudan. The Sudanese people need a lot more support than what's happening right now.
As we reflect on 3 years of the war in Sudan, how do we as the international community do better at supporting our Sudanese comrades? If you have any ideas, let us know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe to OkayAfrica's YouTube channel so you don't miss out on content just like this.